Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are moving way beyond the headlines and right into the engine room of global financial defense.
We are. We're talking about regulatory compliance and really professional competence.
And we're diving deep into this fascinating report that puts a spotlight on the very people tasked with fighting financial crime, specifically in the Dubai International Financial Center, the DIFC.
This is such a critical discussion. It's really for those of you who know that constant pressure, that need to maintain robust defenses against anti-money laundering, counter-terrorist financing, and, increasingly counter-proliferation financing, or CPF.
And the person at the center of all of this, the central node, is the Money Laundering Reporting Officer, the MLRO.
Absolutely. And if their expertise stagnates, the whole system is at risk.
It is. The regulatory environment just demands this constant evolution. And before we really get into unpacking this comprehensive DFSA review, we do want to quickly thank our partner. This episode of The Deep Dive is brought to you by 10 Leaves.
So, our mission today is to dissect the findings of a thematic review from the Dubai Financial Services Authority, the DFSA.
And this review focused specifically on one thing, right?
That's right. How well MLROs are meeting their continuing professional development requirements, their CPD.
And the benchmark from the regulators is pretty clear on this. Every single MLRO has to complete a minimum of 15 hours of valid CPD per calendar year. So let's just start with the hard numbers. The DFSA looked at the 2023 AML returns, the CPD logs. What was the headline finding?
Well, the DFSA was generally positive. The findings were broadly positive, I think was the phrase they used.
Okay.
So for MLROs at what they call authorized firms, or AFs, the compliance rate was 79%, so almost 4 out of 5.
79%. I mean, that's a strong base, but it still leaves a pretty big gap, 21%. In a place of the DIFC, that feels significant.
It is. And here is the really crucial data point, the one that tells the story. Every single instance of noncompliance, that whole 21%, it happened exclusively in firms where the MLRO held a hybrid role.
The hybrid role. You mean they were doing two jobs at once?
Exactly. They were responsible for both the MLRO function and the compliance officer, or CO, function.
Wow. So wait, the pure MLROs, the ones just focused on that one job, had a 100% compliance rate.
100%. It tells you something really fundamental about the stress, the complexity of that hybrid role.
Is the DFSA sort of implicitly warning firms here that maybe the compliance burden is just becoming too much for one person to handle?
I think you can definitely read it that way. I mean, the data supports it. The dedicated MLROs, perfect compliance. But the hybrid ones, only 73%.
And I saw there were other interesting splits in the data, too.
There were. Outsourced MLROs actually achieved 90% compliance, which was higher than the in-house MLROs at 83%. But that hybrid function, it was the consistent point of failure.
And the review also mentions some real ambiguity around those hybrid roles. Some MLROs were confused.
Yeah, they were. They wondered, do I need 15 hours for my MLRO hat and another 15 for my CO hat, a total of 30, or was it just a 15 total?
So a genuine lack of clarity.
Exactly, in the rules wording. And you could see the effort. We saw 8 hybrid MLROs complete 30 or more hours, which is real commitment. But only 2 of them actually managed to log 15 valid hours relevant to each role.
So their hard work was basically invalidated by how they split the hours.
It was. The good news, though, is that the DFSA is planning to issue a policy clarification on that to, solve that confusion.
Okay, let's pause there because this brings up another big issue. The bare minimum approach.
That's the real danger. If you aim for exactly 15 hours, you're introducing a massive risk.
Because if the regulator throws out just 1 hour of your activities, you're instantly non-compliant.
Precisely. And the review found cases where the majority of logged hours were actually deemed invalid.
So what are they logging that the DFSA is just rejecting? What's considered invalid?
Well, there were a few recurring mistakes. First, any activity that was less than 30 minutes long, just thrown out. CPD has to be structured.
Okay, that makes sense. What else?
Time spent preparing, reviewing, or even delivering training materials. That was invalid.
Wait, hold on. Preparing training is invalid. If I spend 10 hours building a custom AML training for my firm, I've definitely learned something.
And that's where we get into the regulatory philosophy here. The DFSA is looking for evidence that the MLRO has received new knowledge, preferably from an outside structured source not just reinforcing what they already know by teaching it.
I see. So self-study of the rules, just rereading the AML module, that wouldn't count either.
Doesn't count. It has to be about receiving specialist input.
Structured, relevant, and specialized. So I'm guessing general corporate training is out too.
Correct. Things like internal business as usual meetings, town halls, general IT training, none of it contributes to that specialist AML skill set. The regulator is drawing a really clear line.
So it's not a box-ticking exercise.
Not at all. It has to lead to demonstrable, practical skill development in fighting financial crime.
It's good to see, though, that not everyone was aiming for that risky 15-hour floor. I saw some really dedicated examples in there.
Absolutely. The high performers are really setting the standard. 38% of MLROs completed 20 or more valid hours, and an incredible 17.5% did 40 or more hours.
Double the requirement, or more.
Way more. They even highlighted good practices, like MLROs who were appointed mid-year but still blew past the minimum. And one great example of an MLRO who was actively seeking out training outside their firm's business model just to get a wider perspective.
That's real professional development.
Now, if we connect this whole idea of relevance to the biggest finding on content selection, the picture starts to get a bit worrying.
Okay.
There was a strong, almost overwhelming preference for free-of-cost CPD.
You're telling me that highly paid, senior MLROs who are on the hook for millions of potential fines are prioritizing free webinars over the kind of specialized paid training they need to fight, say, proliferation financing.
That is precisely what the review found. In interviews, MLROs flat out admitted that the cost or lack of it was often more important than the scope of the content or whether it addressed a specific learning need.
That cost over quality mindset, it must lead to some huge gaps.
It did. Glaring and critical gaps.
So what were they missing? What was the DFSA most concerned about?
The biggest red flag was the low attendance at training sessions on targeted financial sanctions, or TFS. These are regularly run by the UAE's Executive Office for Control and Non-Proliferation, the EOCN.
And that training is fundamental to the UAE's entire risk management framework.
It is, but a significant number of MLROs just weren't engaging with it.
That's a huge miss. And what about the internal training they did log?
Well, that was often just mandatory group e-learning, sometimes pitched at a really basic, money laundering 101 level.
Which is fine for general staff, but not for a senior MLRO.
Exactly. It's insufficient. And it often lacked any tailoring for the specific DIFC rules or the kind of complex threats relevant to their firm's own risk profile.
So the message from the DFSA is pretty blunt then.
It is. MLROs have to be discerning. They need to avoid that basic content unless they're brand new to the role. They're expected to use their CPD to close specific, identified risk gaps, not just check a box with whatever is cheapest.
Okay, let's turn to the firms themselves, their responsibility. I think it's AML Rule 11.3.1 that says firms have to ensure their MLROs are competent. So what was the verdict on employer support?
The financial support was, surprisingly, quite strong. 22 firms provided clear funding for in-house MLROs. They'd reimburse them for courses, even for internationally recognized AML qualifications.
So the money's there.
The money's there. And 90% of the outsourced MLROs also got funding from their consultancy employers.
So firms are willing to cut the check. My guess is the challenge is more on the non-financial side, the, time and structure needed to actually do the training when your hair is on fire.
That is exactly where the clear room for improvement is. Non-financial support was weak.
Which means things like learning and development frameworks and just giving them enough time during the day to do it.
Precisely. You can give an MLRO a $5,000 training budget, but if they're constantly firefighting or juggling a hybrid role, they are always going to go for the fastest, easiest option, which is usually free.
Did the DFSA highlight any firms that were doing this well? The non-financial part?
They did. Good practices included firms that proactively planned L&D with their MLROs at the start of the year. They'd build it into performance appraisals.
So planning ahead.
And actively tracking it, sending reminders to spend the budget before the end of the year. That kind of organizational support stops that last-minute panic to just chase hours in December.
Let's pivot to the admin side of things. We've talked about the bare minimum being risky, but the review also said poor record-keeping sometimes made people look non-compliant, even when they weren't.
Yes, that was a key finding. 16 out of 34 MLROs suffered because of bad logging. In one case, if the MLRO had just logged all their valid hours correctly, they would have been compliant.
What were the common mistakes there? What were people doing wrong on their logs?
Oh, a whole laundry list of errors. Missing key identifiers, vague descriptions of what they did, and a big one was not breaking down large internal programs.
What do you mean?
Like they just log internal conference, 48 hours. But you need to break that down into the specific relevant sessions. They were also logging things in credits instead of hours and frequently rounding up their time.
So a 40-minute webinar becomes 1 hour.
Exactly. It artificially inflates the numbers.
And what do the good record keepers do?
Clarity and depth. They had clear details of the provider, a proper content breakdown, and this is the best part section for key takeaways.
I like that.
It demonstrates the practical application. It moves the conversation from just time spent to knowledge gained. It's no wonder so many MLROs told the DFSA they'd prefer a mandatory log template just to standardize it all.
Okay, finally, let's briefly touch on the DNFBPs. These are the designated non-financial businesses or professions.
Right, your lawyers, accountants, that sort of thing.
They're subject to the main AML module, but not that specific 15-hour CPD rule. So how did they do when they voluntarily reported?
This created a really interesting paradox. 92% of DNFBP MLROs still ticked yes on their return, saying they completed 15 hours.
92%, that's high.
It is, but after a closer look, only 2 DNFBP MLROs in the whole sample actually met the 15-hour minimum with content that was relevant to AML.
Wow. That is a huge disconnect. So they're putting in the hours, but it's the wrong kind of hours.
Exactly. Lawyers and accountants have their own professional CPD they have to do, like legal ethics or new accounting standards. And that's valuable, but it has zero relevance to their role as an MLRO. It doesn't help with risk assessments or transaction monitoring.
It's like a pilot logging their mandatory CPR training as flight hours. It's important, sure, but it doesn't prove they can handle an engine failure.
That is a perfect analogy. The DFSA reminded them that under Rule 11.3.1, they still have to demonstrate competence and adequate knowledge, and targeted annual AML CPD is the most obvious way to do that.
So for them, it's about recognizing that this is a distinct requirement, separate from their day job.
Yes. The type of CPD is different.
So as we close this out, what does this all mean? The DFSA has really held up a mirror to the financial crime fighting community.
I think the final synthesis is this. That 79% compliance rate, it's okay, it's acceptable, but the quality of that compliance is deficient. The review shows failures not really in effort, but in approach.
Relying on the bare minimum.
Yes, prioritizing free content over what's actually relevant and getting weak non-financial support from their firms. The DFSA now expects MLROs and their firms to show evidence of the corrective steps they've taken based on these findings.
This review really proves that competence isn't just a number you hit. It's a strategic defense against these incredibly sophisticated threats. Thank you for walking us through this critical landscape.
My pleasure.
And here's a final thought for you to take away. Since we know MLROs often prioritize free CPD over what's most relevant, how might regulatory bodies or even the industry itself start to incentivize the pursuit of specialized paid training that directly tackles the most sophisticated threats, like proliferation financing, instead of just enforcing mandates that can lead to people chasing basic compliance hours? That's all for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.